does know who is sitting before them. Dr. Cohen?
Bobby Cohen. Could you hear that? Yeah.
Barry Cozier.
Felipe Franco.
Deanna Hoskins.
Dwayne Sampson, and our Executive Director.
Jasmine Georgia Zila.
So, good afternoon. I am Dwayne Sampson, Chair of the New York City Board of Correction. Also present this afternoon are my colleagues, Vice Chair Deanna Hoskins, Felipe Franco, Dr. Robert Cohen, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome our newest member, Judge Barry Cozier, who is joining us for the first time today. Judge Cozier maintains a litigation practice where he represents institutions and individuals in complex business and commercial litigation, real estate litigation, federal and state appeals, arbitration and mediation, and advisory litigation strategy. Judge Cozier was formerly an Associate Justice of the Appellate Division, Supreme Court, Second Judicial Department, Justice of the New York Supreme Court, Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for the New York State Courts, and a Judge of the Family Court of the State of New York. Judge Cozier is an adjunct professor at Fordham University School of Law and an examiner on the Committee on Character and Fitness for the Supreme Court, Appellate Division, First Department. He formerly served as Vice Chair of the Mayor's Advisory Committee on the Judiciary, a mediator in the Civil Appeals Mediation Program for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, a member of the Board of Directors of the New York University School of Law Alumni Association, a fellow of the New York Bar Foundation, and a member of the Executive Committee of the Commercial and Federal Litigation Section of the New York State Bar Association. We are happy to have Judge Cozier as a member of the board. Welcome, Judge Cozier. Would you like to make a statement or comment? Yes. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome everyone to today's public hearing, which we are convening for the purpose of hearing oral comments on the board's proposed rules. I will turn it over to Vice Chair Deanna Hoskins, Chair of the board's ad hoc rulemaking committee, for some remarks regarding the substance of the proposed rules.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. The New York City Charter authorizes the New York City Board of Corrections to establish minimum standards for the care, custody, correction, treatment, supervision, and discipline of all persons held or confined under the jurisdiction of the Department of Correction. To that end, the board has enacted major reforms related to restrictive housing and solitary confinement practices, also known as punitive segregation, through rulemaking in 2015 and 2021. However, the board's restrictive housing regulations have never been implemented. Indeed, they were suspended by Emergency Executive Order number 279, which has been renewed every 5 days since November 1, 2021. Local Law 42 of 2024, which takes effect on July 28, 2024, prohibits the use of solitary confinement in city jails and establishes guidelines for the use of restrictive housing, emergency lock-ins, de-escalation housing, and use of restraints, among other areas of correctional operations. Local Law 42 directs the board to take any actions necessary for the implementation of this local law, including the promulgation of rules related to procedures and penalties prior to the effective date. The requirements of Local Law 42 overlap significantly with the provisions set forth in Chapter 6 of the board's existing rules, but differ from Chapter 6 in some respects. The proposed rules amend Chapter 1 and Chapter 6 of Title 40 of the Rules of the City of New York Restrictive Housing and Correctional Facilities to comply with the requirements set forth in Local Law 42. We'll actually move to remarks now.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hoskins. Thank you, Vice Chair Hoskins. Today's public hearing is taking place pursuant to Chapter 45 of the New York City Charter, known as the City Administrative Procedure Act. The purpose of this hearing is to hear comments and feedback on the board's proposed rules from people with lived experience, families, staff, advocates, and other members of the community. Our goal today is to gather information that will help inform the board's decisions on the proposed amendments. It is not our purpose today to respond to questions, nor will the board debate the proposals. You may submit comments until the close of business today, June 17th, 2024. After the public comment period, the board will review all public comments submitted, amend the proposed rules if necessary, and vote on final rules at the next board meeting on June 25th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Today, speakers are invited to present oral comments on the proposed rules. If you have not already done so, please sign up on the sheet provided for that purpose. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Please begin your comments by identifying yourself and your organization or affiliation, if any. I'll start by calling the first 3 names on in-person sign-in sheet. The first person can stand at the podium, and the next 2 can sit in the first row of the podium. But before that, we have our public advocate here, Jamani Williams. And Mr. Williams, if you can, present your comments.
Hello. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Peace and blessing. Love and light to everyone. As was mentioned, my name is Jamani Williams. I'm the public advocate of the City of New York. I'd like to thank the chair and the Board of Corrections for holding this meeting today and for taking seriously the promulgation of rules related to implementing Local Law 42. I'd also like to echo the board's request for adequate funding to fully staff their agency, as they will be an integral part of ensuring the implementation of the law. It's no small feat to reconcile the intentions of any new laws and the day-to-day practices of an agency like the Department of Corrections. I want to begin by calling solitary confinement what it is: torture. It's cruel, it's inhumane, it can ruin people's lives, and too many do not survive it. I also want to make clear there's been a lot of conversations about what that meant, and our law sought to really define what we see as solitary confinement, which really focuses on the prolonged isolation of an individual. Many try to mask the practice of isolation and euphemistic names like punitive segregation, but there is not much difference. It is very often solitary confinement. Prolonged isolation that looks like, feels like, and acts like solitary confinement is solitary confinement. Physical isolation coupled with lack of meaningful social interaction causes or exacerbates trauma, as well as other mental health issues. The law as passed provides guidance on how detainees should be separated when necessary, in a way to make both those housed and working in NYC jails just a bit safer. People who experience isolation in jails and prisons suffer socially, mentally, emotionally, and financially, both while incarcerated and after release. No one leaves solitary confinement a whole. They struggle with the lasting effects of trauma and are disproportionately more likely to die by suicide or homicide. They are also at increased risk for homelessness and substance abuse. A 2019 North Carolina study found the survivors of solitary confinement were 127 times more likely to die from opioid overdose within 2 weeks of their release. That's why we're here today discussing Local Law 42, which bans the harmful experience of prolonged isolation in New York City jails. A law the City Council passed with a supermajority and then override a mayoral veto with an even higher majority, not to mention with the widespread public and community support. It is imperative that the board ensure compliance with this law as written, as the administration has made clear that do not wish to comply with Local Law 42 and have asked Judge Swain to halt implementation. Instead of trying to delay and circumvent their legal obligations to continue this deeply harmful practice, the administration should act immediately to implement this law. And again, we're really focused on how to keep everyone safe: corrections officers, people who work on the jails, and particularly the detainees who are under the care of the Department of Corrections. So thank you again for really taking this seriously, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Public Advocate Jamani Williams. So now I will ask Lauren Stevens to come to the podium, Victor Herrera, and Michael Klinger.
Should I begin? Great. My name is Lauren Stevens Davidowitz. I'm a staff attorney at Legal Aid's Prisoners' Rights Project. Thank you for the chance to comment on the proposed rules. On Friday, Legal Aid submitted written comments in which we suggested some edits to language proposed by the board, but that is not required by Local Law 42. Our suggestions aim to protect the rights of people in custody by eliminating language that could lead to abuses by the Department of Correction. We ask the board to adopt our changes. Today, though, I wish to emphasize a broader point. Reports from people in custody, the media, court filings, and the board itself highlight that without intense public scrutiny, the department consistently flouts its legal requirements. For example, we know that while the department has publicly stated that it doesn't use solitary confinement, in fact, it continues to isolate people in custody in various named and unnamed units. The board's vigorous oversight is therefore critical to keeping people in custody safe. To that end, this rulemaking process presents an opportunity to ensure that these minimum standards serve their intended purpose, to create additional requirements around restrictive housing that will incentivize the steps necessary to accomplish the department's shift in housing models. We urge the board to help provide important structures to support management strategies DOC must develop to comply with the local law's requirements. For instance, in response to the Nunez Monitor's findings that the department does not adequately staff or supervise RESH, the board could set staffing ratio requirements in restrictive housing units and require the consistent assignment of officers, captains, and assistant deputy wardens in these units. Also, in response to the department's repeated failures to provide sufficient programming, including mandated schooling to young adults in restrictive housing, the board could implement robust reporting requirements around programming. It could require the department to report on exactly what programming it offers and when, and to report on the metrics the department uses to assess how consistently the programs are provided and attended. In short, the board now has the chance to improve the department's restrictive housing practices and increase its scrutiny of these practices. Given the department's abysmal track record, we urge the board not to squander this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, board. My name is Victor Herrera. I support Intro 42, Public Advocate's introduction to changing the minimum standards in regards to solitary confinement. I myself is a lived experience solitary confinement survivor. Served almost 2 years on Rikers Island and actually 4 years in the state penitentiary solitary confinement. As far as the minimum standards concerned, I have to put in that as far as how much we change the minimum standards, how much is the DOC going to account for assuring that the individuals being held in solitary confinement are going to be monitored and ensure that their safety is of utmost concern. Okay, minimum standards have been in place for quite some time, and I'm hoping that with the changes that there are some changes that will include some accountability in terms of the correctional health services and DOC simultaneously. Individuals can be confined and minimum standards can just be ignored. Okay, and I just want to make sure that, you know, that my voice is heard in regards to the board assuring that these accountability factors are in place to make sure that these individuals held in solitary are provided humane treatment while there, whether de-escalation or whether even for minimal lockdown. Okay, their treatment is and care is of utmost importance. And, I believe that's what minimum standards is in place for. Accountability is one of the main factors that I'm just standing here for. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Klinger?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Michael Klinger. I'm a jail services attorney with Brooklyn Defender Services. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard and to provide some comments on the board's proposed rules implementing Local Law 42. Brooklyn Defenders is a member of the Jails Action Coalition and Halt Solitary Campaign and believes in the importance of this new law, which will finally end solitary confinement in all forms and by all names for periods greater than 4 hours. In addition to bringing New York City more closely into compliance with existing international human rights laws and norms, the law will reduce violence and improve the health and wellness of people in the department's custody. While we generally approve of the board's proposed rules as circulated last month, we join with our colleagues in calling for important clarifications designed to strengthen the rules and fully reflect the intention of the council in passing the law. In addition, Brooklyn Defenders has engaged along with other defender organizations in an effort to create a workable and just process for disciplinary hearings as required by the law. Because both the board's proposed rules and the clarifications we urge the board to adopt will require the department to make some adjustments, today we'd like to highlight some important questions for the department to answer in anticipation of the July 28th enactment of the law. To begin, the disciplinary hearings as required under Local Law 42 should be held in person, and a virtual option should be made available upon request of the accused individual or their legal representative or advocate. What physical space or spaces does the department plan to use for in-person hearings, and how does it plan to accommodate requests for virtual hearings? The law also requires the department to provide no less than 48 hours notice to both the accused and their legal representative or advocate. That notice must include a clear statement of the basis for any proposed placement in restrictive housing, as well as all evidence relevant to the charges. This means the department must be able to identify and contact each individual's counsel of record. What steps has the department taken to be ready to notify each person facing a disciplinary hearing implicating Local Law 42 protections and their counsel of record? Further, the board should require the department to maintain an up-to-date list of available attorneys or advocates for hearings when people are unable to secure representation through their counsel of record. What steps will the department take to create and maintain such a list? Also, there may be times when the department alleges that an individual has refused to attend a hearing. Any such refusal must be recorded on video with audio and made part of the record. How, especially given the department's inability to promptly return body-worn cameras to use, does the department plan to provide staff with handheld or other cameras to make such recordings? Additionally, whether a hearing is conducted in person or virtually, the department must allow for the accused and their advocate to be able to confer privately both before and during the hearing. How are the physical and virtual spaces identified for hearings able to accommodate this need? Also at the hearing, when an interpreter is needed, the department must provide one. How does the department intend to ensure that when hearings are scheduled, the need for an interpreter is communicated and that if needed, one is provided? Some of these changes were contemplated previously in anticipation of the implementation of RMAS, while others may be new. But upon implementation in late July, for which we urge the board to adopt its proposed rules with the additional clarifications submitted by the Jails Action Coalition, Halt Solitary Campaign, and the Defender organizations and others, the department must be prepared to provide the essential due process that this law requires. We look forward to hearing at the June 25th BOC meeting the concrete steps the department is taking to be fully prepared for implementation next month. Thank you.
Excuse me 1 second. Thank you, sir. It won't be a question and answer period, so thank you.
There won't be, we cannot ask questions of people who are testifying?
At this time, there will not be a question and answer period.
Why can't we ask questions of people who are testifying about their testimony? We've always been able to do that in the past.
There might be a procedural issue based on CAPA, what I'm hearing from our executive.
CAPA
director.
says we're not allowed to ask questions?
I said there may be a procedural issue based on CAPA. In my opening statements, it did indicate that we will not be questions and answers.
I think we lose a lot by not
Mhm.
having a chance to hear a little more detail of issues that are raised by the people who are here, that I had further questions on.
Do respect that, Dr. Cohen.
Well, I don't
And-
think you're respecting it.
Well, I'm just saying, let me get with council and see if they can do some research and see if we can move forward with questions.
You're gonna do that now?
The council is Melissa here? Yeah. She's texting her now. Let's see what happens, but we'll proceed. And we can ask Mr. Klinger, you will be around to come back if we find that questions can be moved forward, okay?
No, but that's what you want to do. I mean, I think it's the right thing to be able to get more information. It's a hearing. It's a
Thank you.
hearing.
Thank
to
you.
hear
We'll
people.
move forward at this time. I'll call Ellen Mir, Zakaria Aquino, and Anthony Dixon.
Sorry, I'm really stuffy today. My allergies are crazy. Good afternoon. Excuse me. My name is Eileen Marr. I am a civil rights union leader from Vocal, New York, a social worker and a harm reduction specialist. I am also a survivor of the hell that is Rikers Island, where I spent over 420 days. Solitary confinement has been scientifically proven to be nothing less than torture. Countless jurisdictions across the world and the United States have either ended their use of solitary or significantly limited its use, and it's working. That includes completely discontinuing it in the Cook County, Illinois jail. And for those who are unfamiliar with Illinois, that's where Chicago is. So it was no picnic there either. Administrators there have reported that the ending of solitary use has been beneficial as a whole for both the incarcerated individuals and staff. At this time, I want to mention my friend Michael Alec. Yep, that Michael. He did a 17-year bid beginning on Rikers and then continuing upstate. He spent over half of his bid in solitary, and it killed him. He died of an opiate overdose while what was basically self-medicating. But he always said to me and to others and to the state assembly, if I'm supposed to be in treatment, aka corrections, and they're doing their job, what sense does it make to yank me out of treatment or corrections and put me in SHU? It doesn't. It's too late for him and countless others, but their deaths do not have to be in vain. New York City DOC must begin to abide by the state and now the city law banning solitary in its entirety, and not only solitary confinement or whatever they want to call it, but also their chairs where they like to handcuff and shackle people to for what they claim is a half hour, but which has been intimated to me by current detainees more than 24 hours. Thank you.
Thank you. I just got word from General Counsel. Before you come up, sir, Anthony, I'd like to bring Michael Klinger back. The ruling is that questions and answers will be allowed from the board. So at this time, any board member that would like to ask questions to any testimony can be allowed.
The rule discusses, in terms of representation, law students, advocates. It doesn't mention the word lawyer. And previous rule attempt, I believe that a little stuck on the question of of the representation by the public criminal bar for people in infraction hearings. I wonder if you could comment on that and what role your organizations should and can play.
Well, So thanks for the question. And yes, certainly I'm not speaking for anybody other than, frankly, my recollection of conversations with other defender organizations as we discussed the rules that we might propose for those hearings. It's my recollection that the rules do encompass the possibility of a legal representative who is an attorney, but that they also include the possibility of a non-attorney representative. We did propose a clarification, the defenders, that is, did propose a clarification to this section of the rules, just to tease out the distinction between an attorney and, for example, a paralegal who might be working under the supervision, or I'm sorry, it's a law student who might be working under the supervision of an attorney. I think the distinction that we were trying to make was that if it is a law student who's going to do these hearings, that they be working under the supervision of an attorney. Whereas if it's a staff member of a defender organization, such as a paralegal or a social worker or anybody else, that is a separate kind of representation that the rules seem to contemplate. And so we didn't make any clarifications about that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll just say when I was a medical student, supervision was not that great all the time. So, and your people are going to be not. Hopefully, you'll be around. They can ask questions. Thank you. Thanks for the answer.
Anthony Dixon.
Honorable New York Board of Correction, I'm humbled to provide testimonies to these chambers today. Today I stand before you as part of a moving group for prison reform throughout New York State, calling on this committee, this board, to fulfill its ethical obligation to end solitary confinement practices in New York City jails, and I urge this esteemed body to adopt and implement Local Law 42. Which limits solitary confinement to 4 hours for emergency de-escalation without delay. First, I must share my personal experience. I was incarcerated for 32 years in New York State Prison and inside of its jails for 2 years. I was also in solitary confinement for 3 years. My best friend, Jimmy Gandia, committed suicide while I was in solitary confinement. One of my experiences in solitary confinement involves an individual that was 21 years old. After 6 hours of being inside solitary confinement, he started to cut himself. When I found out what was going on, I asked him to come outside and talk to me. Of course, he couldn't come out, but I was trying to just get him to just think. This individual cut himself multiple times before I was able to convince him that was not the way to go. My testimony today summarizes 3 areas that I want to underpin for Local Law 42. However, because I know much of the testimony will just be repeated before you, I want to focus on one that might not be repeated to you. Racially, Local Law 42 addresses the gross discrimination in how solitary confinement is applied. New York State statistics speak loud and clear to us at this hour. They say what all of us know is all too true. In the state that houses the Statue of Liberty, in the state that former slaves once fled to the north, we find today that there are more people of color more likely than white American New Yorkers to be arrested and frisked, more likely to be convicted, more likely to be wrongly convicted, more likely to face stiffer sentences, more likely to be placed in solitary confinement than white New Yorkers for the same infractions, more likely to be denied parole, more likely to be denied employment once released. In this state, the so-called Empire State. This narrative illuminates a deeply troubling reality within our criminal legal system, one that we cannot and should not ignore at this hour on our leave. They represent real lives, real family, real communities, real individuals, human beings that are disproportionately impacted by systemic biases and inequalities. Each bullet point that I read to you today paint a picture of a system that perpetuates cycles of marginalization and oppression. Each data point represents countless individuals who have been denied equal justice inside of our system, whose potential has been stuffed out and whose communities bear the scars of their absence and their struggles. From the point of course, thank you. I call on this board to defend local law 42 vigorously. The time for half measures and delay is over. Our collective humanity demands we end this practice. Stand with the people. Stand with the facts. Stand with the statistics. Fully implement local law 42. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zakiya?
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before the board regarding its proposed rules on restrictive housing. My name is Zakiya Warkino. I'm a policy advocate and social worker at Bronx Defenders. Bronx Defenders will also be submitting written testimony. Bronx Defenders urges the Board of Correction to adopt its proposed rules necessary to comply with local law 42 ending solitary confinement in all forms and by all names. We urge for the full implementation of local law 42, which was enacted by City Council with an overwhelming supermajority, including adoption of the proposed rules regarding legal representation and due process for individuals facing disciplinary infractions and possible placement in restrictive housing, which were submitted jointly by the city's public defense offices. In New York City, solitary confinement is almost exclusively inflicted on Black and Latinx people, who make up over 90% of all people in New York City jails. This practice has taken the lives of Khalif Browder, Layleen Polanco, Brandon Rodriguez, Elijah Muhammad, Eric Tavera, Bradley Ballard, Jason Echeverra, and countless others. Solitary confinement and the current DOC restrictive housing policies and practices amount to torture. It causes devastating and deadly harm. It causes and exacerbates medical conditions such as heart disease and high blood pressure, conditions that Black and brown people disproportionately suffer from. Solitary causes people to engage in self-mutilation. It causes anxiety, depression, and psychosis. This type of isolation also magnifies the lack of care that our clients receive. This lack of care evolves into desperation. As reported by our incarcerated clients, this desperation manifests in their behavior as acting out, disobeying orders, splashing, increased aggression towards staff and other people in custody, and most serious, fire setting within one's cell, putting everyone in the facilities at risk. I have had clients report hearing voices while in isolation. Clients often share feeling brain fog and like they are losing it. Some have said they experience trouble with basic things like word recall, decision-making, and critical thinking. Symptoms like these are devastating in many ways. But within the context of their criminal cases, it often impacts their ability to engage with their legal team and ultimately participate in their defense. and I'll wrap quickly. Addressing the myriad issues, Local Law 42 outlines the necessary implementation of the right to counsel as a due process safeguard. Since the fall of 2019, Bronx Defenders Prisoners' Rights Project has tracked clients throughout the disciplinary process during the many iterations of solitary, including PSEG and ESH. What continues to be apparent in the bewildering array of proven failures and incompetencies in the disciplinary system, all of which could have been prevented if our clients had access to counsel. And lastly, contrary to purported justification for its use, solitary makes jails and outside communities less safe. Thus, we urge the board to adopt Local Law 42 in its entirety. New York City must stop the torturous practice of solitary confinement once and for all.
Thank you. I'll ask Roger Clark, Scott Petrovitz, and Jeanette Bocanea. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As a former survivor of solitary confinement,
Excuse me, sir. Could you just state your name also, please?
Speak to the what?
Could you state your name also?
Oh, Roger Clark. As a former, like I stated, as a former survivor of solitary confinement, I could safely say that solitary confinement is torture. It causes devastating harm and worsens safety, doesn't make safety better in prison. Solitary confinement does cause some of the symptoms that the former speaker spoke about: brain fog, discomfort. And 13 years after coming out of the Department of Correction, I still have the secondary feelings of being in solitary confinement. It's something that haunts you even after you leave prison. So I'm asking you, in line with the long-standing evidence that is presented before you, that you embrace Local Law 42 and end solitary confinement beyond 4 hours, and instead allow for proven alternative forms of access to 14 hours, no less than 14 hours a day of outside cell recreation. Because it's not fair for individuals to be in there, and now it's the law. You know what I'm saying? It's not fair for individuals who, especially when it's the law for the Department of Correction, whether it's the warden or the correction officers, for them to break the law and continue to place people in solitary confinement for days on end, or months or years, while it's the law. If I break the law out here, there's going to be no mercy on me. So I'm respecting you, asking y'all to hold correction officers accountable. You know what I'm saying? That's the minimum y'all could do. And one way of doing that is embracing this law, Local Law 42, and holding them accountable if they break the law. You know what I'm saying? With that, I end my testimony.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Paltrowitz. I'm part of the Halt Solitary campaign and Jails Action Coalition. It's very humbling to be here and to testify along with so many people who testified, Roger just now, Anthony, everybody who is speaking here, who has lived through solitary or have had or lost their loved ones in solitary. I want to thank the board for all of the work and the staff for all of the work to get these rules to where they are. And I want to urge and join the call of everybody here to urge the board to adopt its rules and to update them with the suggestions that our coalitions have made. As you know, this is not only a moral obligation anymore on this board, it is now a legal obligation. Local Law 42 makes extremely clear and very specifically the rules and obligations that have to happen in DOC, and that the board has to adopt rules to be in compliance with the law, including banning solitary in all forms and all names beyond 4 hours, and requiring otherwise that every person in the city jails has access to at least 14 hours at a cell per day. A supermajority of the New York City Council has spoken twice to make this the law, and now it's the board's obligation to carry out the will of the people that has been expressed through the city council. But beyond these obligations, this is really a moment for the board to do what is historically right, to stand on the right side of history. After a decade and more of this board trying to take steps to limit the use of solitary, this is the moment to finally end this practice and to utilize alternatives that have been proven to not only better protect the health of people who are incarcerated, but also dramatically reduce violence inside of correctional settings and after people come home. So I just urge the board, please take a very close look at the recommendations that our coalitions have made, and please use this historic moment to finally end this torture, to save lives, and to improve safety for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeanette Bocanegra with Justice for Families. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeanette Bocanegra. I am with Justice for Families. And I can't even, everyone said what needs to be said, including our city speaker. There's research that demonstrates that what's happening in Rikers is horrible. We all know that it has to get shut down. But I'm going to tell you, as a parent of a mother of a young person who entered Rikers at the age of 16, he's going to be 29 this year. But the things that he experienced in Rikers, I couldn't understand. I'm emotional because everyone has said everything. Parents don't talk about what happens when our young people and our loved ones return home. We're expected to put pieces together from a treatment that if I, as a parent, locked him up in his room, I would be held accountable by the child welfare system. He also tried to commit suicide just to get out of a space. He was lucky that he didn't achieve what he wanted to. Years later, I'm still trying to put the pieces together for him, for my family, and for the community that I serve and been living in for almost 40 years. We're doing a horrible job. And if it takes changing a law and implementing it, and if it's in your hands, we trust that you can do a better job. We're losing generations of young, gifted, talented young people due to these horrible treatments. We're losing generations. Rikers has contributed too much. We demolished Spofford, which was an extension to what was happening to our loved ones. We don't need to lock our young people and our loved ones in room just to correct a behavior. There's so many different ways that we can do corrective behavior. And it starts by healing the people that we traumatized, by healing the people that we hurt. I'm trying to put my son together. He said to me yesterday, "Mommy, I love you. Thank you for not giving up." Many families give up on their loved ones, and they're out in the street, they're homeless, hungry, ready to go back into another system. So our communities want to do a better job, but we need to invest in our communities as well. And if it's in your hands, because most of you look like us, that you can make a better decision, I strongly encourage you to do. I'm also working to heal my community so that they can hold our local politicians accountable, because I'm tired of them too. I've been doing this work for almost 38 years. And since 2010, it's been a different message. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. There's one question.
Ms. Bocanegra. Ms. Bocanegra. Thank you for your testimony.
we hardly ever hear from families, so I appreciate that you were here today. Any further guidance regarding what we, the board, could do to support families whose loved ones are in Rikers?
Thank you, Mr. Franco, because I do appreciate you. You were part of a group for New York State and New York City who shut down 25 youth facilities that were harming our kids. Our kids were coming back worse than when they were taken away. If the amount of money that was given to our communities, our schools, we're trusting agencies and institutions that have done a horrible job, and we don't hold them accountable. So I'm demonstrating that what I'm doing in my community, and if anyone wants to see, you're welcome to come by 180th and Honeywell, follow the yellow brick road to Hope. But the work that we're doing also is national, hearing from families impacted by the juvenile justice system. And if you want a snapshot of what we've been doing since 2010, in 2012, I never liked research projects until I had to work on one. Families Unlocking Futures, the Justice for Families report that really highlighted the crisis across the country. But I took the lead in New York City, and since then, we've been partnering with systems. We've been supporting families. We've been creating programs that can divert not just the young person, but really support the family as a unit. I'm also a lucky parent because I have 6 kids. My oldest is 38. My youngest will be 29. And because my youngest consumed a lot of my time, my 15-year-old at that time felt like I neglected her. And though she didn't need anything, but she needed my emotional and support as she was developing into a young woman. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done with families. There's a lot of work that families need, right? But we stigmatize families and we judge them without giving them the resources that they need.
Thank you.
Ryan, well, I apologize for the name. Okay. Mary Osier and Fran Gatellis.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Aquata, and I work with Freedom Agenda. Thank you for this opportunity to present comments on the board's proposed rules regarding restrictive housing. Freedom Agenda is a member-led project at the Urban Justice Center. Our members are New Yorkers who have been detained on Rikers or who have lost loved ones to Rikers, who have loved ones who are or have been detained there. Nearly all of our members have either experienced the horrors of solitary confinement
Hold on one
themselves.
second, please. Could someone please turn off their phone? Put it on silent, please. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Nearly all of our members have either experienced the horrors of solitary confinement themselves, or they've accompanied a loved one through that horrific experience. And for years, our members have testified in hearings before the Board of Correction, the City Council, and the state legislature, have spoken out at rallies, town halls, webinars, and more. Some of them are here, have joined this hearing here today. And they've outlined repeatedly the horrors of solitary confinement and the ways that the Department of Correction has continued to utilize solitary confinement, no matter how many times over the years they've changed what they call it or they've tweaked how they run it. Our members supported the efforts of the Jails Action Coalition and the Halt Solitary campaign to pass what is now Local Law 42. And we now urge the board to adopt the rules you've proposed to comply with Local Law 42 with slight modifications. I've submitted written testimony outlining those more specifically, but I'll summarize them briefly. We support that the board should revisit the changes to Section 105 in order to make sure that all provisions are as explicit as they are in Local Law 42, including that all people in the jails must have access to at least 14 hours of daily out-of-cell time, and also that the minimum out-of-cell requirements under the rules still apply to people in contagious disease units. The board should also revisit the changes to Section 619 to make clear that everyone's entitled to 7 hours of programming outside of a cell in a group setting, and also that all programming time shall be led by therapeutic staff, programming staff, outside community groups, or peers. And finally, the board should add specific requirements for how the department shall carry out the legal representation requirement as detailed in the public comments by public defender organizations who will be providing much of that legal representation. So in summary, we urge the board to adopt its proposed restrictive housing rules with these modifications on June 25th and move us forward toward the use of evidence-based practices that will improve health and safety for people who are detained and work in NYC jails. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary? Busera?
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Buser, and I'm speaking today in support of rule changes to be consistent with supporting Local Law 42. By way of background, I am a former Assistant Chief of Mental Health on Rikers Island and author of the book Lockdown on Rikers. My last post at Rikers was the solitary confinement unit. When I was first assigned to this unit, nothing could have prepared me for the degree of suffering inside these cells. Headbanging, blood-stained walls, makeshift nooses, agonized, shell-shocked faces begging for a reprieve. The role of the mental health department was to dole out medication and to identify those at high risk for suicide, which was difficult as virtually everyone was threatening to kill themselves. I had many surreal moments asking myself how a practice that drives people to self-mutilation and suicide could be operating in our country, in our city. I left Rikers Island about 20 years ago, but it hardly matters. The images of the suffering inside these cells has never left me. Post-Rikers, I have been actively involved in the passage of the HALT bill, as well as with the organization Social Workers and Allies Against Solitary Confinement. I have also had the opportunity to spend 3 days visiting 3 prisons in Colorado where humane alternatives to solitary confinement were successfully implemented. The changeover from solitary to a humane system was not easy, but it took a willingness and it took a determination to do better. It is not a simple matter, I would concede, but the result was greater safety and a shockingly calmer culture as compared to Rikers Island. So I saw for myself that it can be done. Here in New York, I am heartened that HALT has passed on the state level and that we now have legislation at the local level. But regardless of legislation, there needs to be a commitment to these changes. And the implementation of Local Law 42 would demonstrate that commitment. The people who populate our jails, those with mental illnesses, the sick, the disdained, are voiceless in this matter. We must speak out for them. Regardless of their station in society, they are human beings and every life matters. I understand the challenges in managing jails and prisons. I have seen it and been immersed in it firsthand. Yet I know that there are better ways of managing the jail population than with solitary confinement. We must vigorously implement Local Law 42. It represents reasonable, humane alternatives. As a society and a city, we can and must do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Frances Skatellis, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I have been working with Physicians for Human Rights since 1992, providing psychological evaluations for victims of persecution and torture around the world. And at some point, it occurred to me, of course, that I wasn't looking at what was going on in this country, where there is also much persecution and torture. As the United Nations has indicated, solitary confinement is, in fact, a form of torture. Our jail system, for a very long time, in addition to practicing solitary confinement, has been a seat of terrible human abuse of human rights. And that has to stop as soon as possible. The application of Law 42 is a first step in trying to have that process proceed. For me, the crucial item in stopping solitary confinement is recognizing that the most harmful part of it in many ways psychologically is the isolation component. The Halt Solitary campaign actually is a group where our name when we started out was CAKE, the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement. And clearly that makes it evident that all of the forms of isolation that you have practiced have in fact been detrimental and harm-causing. People can't, that is antithetical to what human beings need. And the one of the features in this new law is a list of some of the services. If you have people who've been determined to be dangerous in some way because of behavior that they've exhibited, yes, they may need to be temporarily separated from the regular population, but separation does not mean being totally isolated. They have to have time where they can be involved socially, communicating with other people. Sometimes they can learn from those other people. Personally, I think in addition to the therapeutic function, there are elements of the interaction that have to include, or what's written into the law. You have to have therapeutic intervention. You have to teach people or help them to learn to respect themselves and respect others and have empathy for others. And all that means setting up important psychological programs within the context of implementing Local Law 42. And in doing, I mean, personally, I also think a lot of those same needs psychologically apply to the general population. And ultimately, I would like to see you, in fact, expand the programming and do your best to really teach people how to become self-respecting, find ways to meet their needs, and not necessarily having to use tactics that they may have been using in the past that in fact are harmful to them. So that way you could have a jail system that is really humane. And that's what I'm urging you to do. And I'm urging you to do it as soon as possible and as well as possible. It should be your goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask for Marion Phillips Cunningham, Leah Faraya, and Chaplain Dr. Victoria A. Phillips.
Oh, the light is bright. Hello, my name is Marion Phyllis Cunningham. I'm a retired nurse educator with a doctorate in both education and an expertise in community health. Both of these inform what I want to speak about today. I am addressing one aspect of Law 40 of Local Law 42, which I support. I am testifying today because I believe that 14 hours of out of the cell time daily for those incarcerated is essential. During the 14 hours, there should be congregate engagement involving quality education and tailored therapeutic and rehabilitative activities addressing the specific needs of the population. Outside experts, I believe, should be employed to facilitate these activities. The promotion of restorative justice and assisting people in participating in effective citizenship should be the focus of these activities. Please see that they are implemented to the fullest. As you know, people are suffering and they need help. They don't need to be punished. Do the right thing, and I thank you very much for allowing me to
Yes, I apologize. Ms.
testify.
Cook.
What is the light on?
Yeah, I know. I was just going to say, is the light really bothering you?
Yes.
In effect.
I can't believe
But
it.
if you're not, or if you're finished, we'll move forward, but I can adjust the lights if you're not finished.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon to the board, as well as to my fellow advocates. My name is Leah Faria, and I am the Director of Community Liaison for the Women's Community Justice Association, also known as WCJA. I am here today to advocate for the proper implementation of Local Law 42. Solitary confinement under any name continues to harm our detained siblings. As my fellow advocates had already stated, solitary confinement causes people to engage in self-mutilation and suicide. It causes heart disease, anxiety, depression, and psychosis. Research shows that even 1 or 2 days in solitary leads to significantly heightened risk of suicide, overdose, and other harms. Women and gender-expansive people enter Rikers with unique trauma and vulnerability that are made so much worse by solitary confinement. Over 80% of the population at Rosie's has a mental health concern, and over 20% has serious mental concerns. Women are disproportionately placed in solitary for low-level offenses, and this punitive segregation amplifies the harms women experience in jails and/or prisons. Placement in restrictive environments also undermines contact with children and other family members and interrupts treatment and services. For women with serious mental illnesses or other trauma symptoms, restrictive housing can be deadly, escalating into destructive behavior as well as self-harm. Even a brief stint in solitary confinement will impact someone's mental health. Even periods measured in hours can cause devastating harm. Laylene Extravaganza Polanco was arrested for a nonviolent charge. She was placed in Rikers solely because she could not afford a $500 bail. She was placed in solitary against the express directions of a doctor, and it killed her. I want to emphasize that solitary confinement does not make communities safer. In fact, it makes them less safe, because even when an individual does not enter Rikers Island with a mental health concern, they are often released with one and without being given any sort of support or treatment. The negative repercussions of this, along with the psychological damage caused by isolation, can persist long after a person's release from solitary and make their transition back to the larger population or to the community considerably more difficult. It is imperative that Local Law 42 gets implemented now to protect our mothers, sisters, and daughters at the Rose M. Singer Center. And decarceration efforts should be stepped up to bring women and gender-expansive people safely back to our communities with the resources they need. Thank you.
Peace and blessings, everyone. I'm Chaplain Dr. Victoria A. Phillips. Everyone knows me as Dr. V, and today I'm here to stand before you as a proud member of the Jails Action Coalition and Halt Solitary. And I'll just be brief and make a couple of points. So in December 2011, Jails Action Coalition actually formed because of the barbaric conditions on Rikers Island. And I just want to be clear on that because, you know, I've heard a name mentioned today, Bradley Ballard. He died in 2013 in Rikers, and the conditions in which he died in have not changed. I know that from personally working on Rikers in many capacities. So when we say separation, not isolation, that's exactly what we mean. And for doing nursing for many years and cognitive behavioral therapy, even on Rikers Island, but in the community, I worked in Kirby, I worked in CPEP in many hospitals, ERs, MICA shelters, and many jails and prisons. And I say that because of all the conditions I've witnessed, it was after my brain surgery, it was Rikers that was embedded in my head. I remembered things about Rikers Island before I even remembered things about my own son. That is the trauma that goes with someone who works in Rikers, who's detained in Rikers, and anyone that comes in contact with Rikers. And I just want to highlight that about a month and a half ago, I was at a conference out of state, and I went to a plantation in the South in Louisiana to visit at a museum. And the conditions in the museum, my God, were horrifying because they were exactly things that I personally have seen in Rikers Island. And we're talking about a museum regarding a plantation that has been closed for how many years? And I physically have seen shower cages in Rikers Island the same way as in this museum. I want to say, 2014 Jails Action Coalition and Halt Solitary campaign, and in 2015 City Council actually voted, and well, we passed ending solitary for 16 to 21-year-olds. At that time, 16 and 17-year-olds were still on the island. We didn't get them off until October 1st, 2017. So in 2015, we ended solitary for 16 to 21-year-olds. And in that same year, this board allowed DOC to open ESH, AKA another name for solitary, which they call enhanced supervision housing, which is still open today. Which is why we say solitary must end by all names, not just any name, but every name. 7 to 8 years ago, I actually testified at City Council for expansion of funding in 4 different areas: programming in DOC, more officers, even against advocates' wishes, DOI and BOC budgets to expand. And BOC budget expanded, and you were able to begin doing reports that you've never done before. And in one of these reports, I can even recall many, you asking CHS to provide information, DOC to provide information, and then you did your own reports. And you were able to see the amount of discrepancies in DOC's reporting. And I say that because they still fall short. There are so many things I could say, but everything I want to make clear, everything I've said about DOC and anything I've mentioned about a direct officer or a housing unit or actual facility has always been based on my professional hats that I wear and never anything personal. So anything that you have ever heard me put on the record has been because of a professional capacity that I've witnessed DOC officers lie, front, and do barbaric things, go off minimum standards and do barbaric actions. And I say that because, Chair, you have a responsibility of being chair of this board to hold DOC accountable in any and all wrongs that they do as the oversight board for the Department of Corrections, whether in this room, when the meeting adjourns, and any time that you find out that they've broken the law or committed lies on the record.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, no, if you can stay 1 second, I'd like Michael and this gentleman here, Roger, is it Roger? Hold on 1 second. Roger Clark, Michael, if you can come back up for a second, question. And Scott.
And everything that we've ever said on the record, the federal monitor since 2015 has validated, but we've said to you for free.
Yeah. I just had a question, and each of you, can respond as you see accordingly. In the interest of time, but it is something that's been overriding questions on accountability. And I guess what role on accountability you see the Board of Correction implementing in that regard in respect to local law 42. So if you can just sort of elaborate or more on accountability as you view.
Definitely would want to consult with colleagues and think more about it and share other ideas. I think off the top of my head, a few things to quickly state. One is to make sure, first and foremost, that everything that's in the proposed rules is fully in compliance with local law 42. We have given some written recommendations about areas that the rules could be strengthened to ensure that they are fully in line with the law. And so I hope that they'll be updated. That's one. I think two, it would be, in your role as oversight body to be monitoring what's happening with respect to the law and making sure at this stage, we're only a little over a month out, and I'm not sure that DOC has done anything really to prepare to be ready to implement the law. And so I would want the board, even as of tomorrow, to be going to the jails to ask questions about what has been done, what is being done in order to implement the law. I would also urge what we've said at board meetings over the last few months, that DOC bring in outside experts like Dr. Bandy Lee and Dr. James Gilligan and others who have designed and carried out real alternatives to solitary that don't involve isolation, but involve separation, like you've heard people say, but have been proven to dramatically reduce violence. So anything that you can do to find out, again, what is DOC doing? What programs are they putting in place? What alternatives are being set? What are they doing to dismantle the shower cages that are no longer allowed to be there? What are they doing to get rid of the cage out of a cage and instead allow people to have meaningful, real out-of-cell time? What are the steps they're doing now? So I would say right now is a really important and critical time. And then also urging them, again, to bring in outside people. And then once the law goes into effect July 28th, similarly, I would encourage the board to be on the island and in any city jail to be observing and learning from people who are living there. What are the conditions like? We'd be happy to provide ideas for things that to be looking at, but including, again, de-escalation confinement units. Are people being placed there? For what reasons? For how long are they there? In restrictive housing units, are people getting 14 hours out of cell time? Is that out of cell time actually real? Is it with other people in a shared space, in a group setting? Are there good programs that are being operated? Are those programs, proven violence prevention type of programs that are providing people the support that they need? Those are just a few of the quick thoughts that I had. I'm sure I could talk for like an hour about it, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Roger.
Yes, I agree with Scott. The best way for accountability is for you to have for the board to have an open communication with every warden, every depth of security. They know what's going on in the jail. They know and if they don't know, then they're not doing their jobs. You know what I'm saying? So just keep an eye on them on the regular, and if there's something that they're not doing, then like not only like hold them accountable, like say it publicly. You know what I'm saying? I know that you all don't have the power. I don't know if you have the power to actually fire somebody, but at least you could bring attention to the issue so that the person who does have the power, for them to be able to hold those accountable. Y'all do have an enormous power, I should say. So those are some of the ones that came up in my head. I'm sure that we could think of a lot more ways of accountability, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you.
Peace and blessings. I probably could come up with more stuff if you gave me some time to think about it. But can you hear me now? I probably could come up with some more, but off the top of my head, this is a few things. Programming I've always testified about because officers always, even the captain, safety officer in all facilities always talk to me about how important programming is. And so when I say programming, I mean consistent programming. And well, he's not here today, but I had often brought that up to board member Ramos, I think how you pronounce his name, because around the young adults, because, you know, juvenile stuff, young adult stuff. And so I'm like, you know, look at the graphs that they give you. Look at the graphs that programming and DOC department will give you. And a lot of the shaded out areas, a lot of the times over the years, I've noticed from being on the advisory board or with Felipe on the task force and things like that, is that those shaded areas usually don't have officers to cover it. And so these are things that I was trying to point out to the board over time. Documentation also, it actually has to be factual. You have to utilize your staff to go in and actually verify what DOC is telling you, because if you do, you'll begin to poke holes in so many areas that they say they've covered or hours that they say they've given to housing units that do not exist. Coaching for the officers. A lot of times advocates get upset when I bring out officers, but you can't teach humanity and not show humanity at the same time. And so many times Melina used to get upset because I would reach out to him because officers, whether captains, deputy wardens, even wardens sometimes, and on the floor housing unit officers the most, reach out to me because, yeah, I know I'm a chaplain, but they reach out to me because they themselves need more training. They themselves are sometimes, when someone's in solitary confinement or any other special unit and they're not getting the services they're supposed to have, many times officers themselves are apprehensive on how to deal with someone. And so we cannot ignore that fact. We have to train them and properly open up the doors. Something I've spoken to leadership, we call them white shirts, something I've spoken to deputy wardens and wardens about, because many times officers will remain silent because they don't want to get in trouble with the higher ups about not knowing or how to properly respond. So coaching for the officers, and I've spoken about bringing it back for the officers on the level or the captain's level, because there used to be two different types of coaching for the officers. And the burnout, check on that, because when I mentioned before about asking 8 years ago for staffing to increase against advocates, it was because of getting people properly to programming, and because they was doing 3 tours even back then. So it's mismanagement and DOC's administration, not necessarily a lack of officers always showing up. And I really quickly want to say 68% of those incarcerated with mental health concerns do not receive treatment. And that's where the board can step in. Accountability for those being taken to medical appointments. Accountability for CHS actually going to the corridors. Speak to the medical directors in each facility, because they will tell you directly what they staff need, the hindrance that are being created by DOC staff, and speak to them outside of the area where DOC is listening to them. And I just also want to point out, when we talk about the Rosie's population, Leah put a lot of great stats on, but one thing she didn't mention that I'm going to mention is that 70% of those in Rosie's females and non-gender conforming population go in being the primary caregiver in the community. So what does that look like for their re-entry? When I say that, because I put it on the record before that Melina, when he was the commissioner, stopped wardens reaching out to me. Many times wardens and deputy wardens would reach out to me regarding people that are in gray areas, haven't been diagnosed with a mental health concern, still in GP, but it's obvious to everyone that something's going on. And they also, wardens and deputy wardens would reach out to me because of people that are getting ready to be released, but haven't been properly prepared for discharge planning and where they're going to go, or how they're going to get to those facilities. That is where this board can truly step in. When we talk about prevention, diversion, public safety on the island, and how to keep people from recidivating and coming back into the system, all of these key things have to be in place and aligned, and DOC has to be held accountable for doing these jobs that are written for them to do. And so that's just a piece of where you can start when we talk about accountability. But I would love to talk further to the board.
All right, well, thank you. Michael?
So first, thank you for the opportunity to address the issue of accountability. And also, since I don't think I mentioned this earlier, we absolutely appreciate all the efforts of the board and staff in putting together the proposed rules as they were circulated in May. I also failed to mention that Brooklyn Defender Services has submitted written testimony. And at the risk of pointing out the length of our written testimony, I'll just say that I think I can partially address your question by referring to our 29th footnote, which does refer to a rule that's being proposed by the board, but the way that it interacts with a rule that we're proposing, or that the Defender Organizations is proposing, opens up the possibility for an exception that we wanted to flag for you so that our own proposal doesn't create a problem for our clients. And the way this works is, right now, as the board is proposing, there's a requirement upon the department to bring a hearing within 5 days of putting someone in pre-hearing temporary restrictive housing. That 5 days can be told, theoretically, if the individual who is the subject of the hearing requests an adjournment for some reason. What we are proposing in our rules is that the department be required to produce essentially full discovery in advance of the hearing. And that means, to be consistent with the rest of the rule that the board's proposed, 48 hours in advance of the hearing, so that the individual and their attorney or representative can review all of that evidence to see what they're facing in the hearing. If the department fails to produce the full discovery in time for the hearing, it would be reasonable for the individual who's the subject of the hearing to request an adjournment. But if our proposed rule were to be adopted by the board and nothing else were to change, then the fact that that individual requested the adjournment would be counted against them, and they would be continued to be held in contravention of the 5-day limit in the pre-hearing detention. So it's that level of detail that, as we were combing through this, and one of my colleagues spotted this one, it's that level of detail that the board, you're engaged in it now, and you wonder about where the accountability is, or at least from our perspective, the rulemaking process, the process of setting the table so that this law, when it's enacted, is fair and accomplishes the goals that the city council intended for it to accomplish. This is the work right now that you're doing, and we're really grateful for it. But it's also that level of detail that we are hoping to see completely tie up all these loose ends, so that none of us create an exception that can undermine the whole purpose of the law.
Thank you very much. Okay. We'll go on. We have Candace, AKA Solitary Survivor, Candy. Okay, I'm sorry, Candy. And Antoinette Anderson. And then after that, we will go to virtual testimony.
Can you hear me? Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Candy, aka Solitary Survivor. I use the alias Solitary Survivor because I spent 1,168 days on Rikers Island. And out of those 1,168 days, I spent 1,122 days in solitary confinement. 1,122 days is an estimated time, for I was hospitalized on numerous occasions for suicidal attempts. Yes, while I was suffering in solitary confinement, I had tried to commit suicide by cutting my wrists. I remember Mary seeing me inside of my cell with blood all over the wall. Swallowing Nair, hair remover, swallowing pills that I'd saved, swallowing industrialized cleaning detergent, hanging myself. I also put a phone receiver in the toilet to electrocute myself. But that didn't work. The officers would say things like, hurry up and kill yourself. Hang it up already. We got 8 hours till the body gets cold. After I'd attempted to electrocute myself, an officer shouted, they're waterproof, just in case one of y'all niggers tried to kill yourself. Yeah, she said the word nigger, a word that I utterly dislike. That's what we were, and that's what we are treated like. while suffering in those death chambers. Niggas in a platform, niggas in a plantation. It wasn't the officers that I was upset with because they're obviously not trained to deal with a mentally ill person. It was actually the mental health employees that I was upset with. I had a mental health worker tell me, "You're not gonna really jump." That's precisely what I did. I had tied a sheet to the light fixture, jump, but it had popped. After that, the mental health employee begged the officers to open the cell door. Another occasion, a mental health employee watched me take pills. I had passed out in the cell, but I could hear the deputy warden asking why I wasn't responsive. Then the mental health employee replied, "She took a lot of pills. I've seen her take about 80 pills." I had taken 88 pills, but who's counting? The deputy warden told them, "Watch Haley, make sure she's okay," then left the area. I'm almost done. Being in solitary confinement was absolute torture. No one deserves to suffer there. No man, no woman, no child, nor beast. It will cause physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual and religious trauma. I know a few people that lost their faith in the higher powers that they believe in. I've had some people ask me, if God is real, why are people suffering in solitary confinement? All I know is that I should have died in solitary confinement. But I didn't. I'm here. I'm free with no criminal record. That's how I know there's a God. The board has to do God's work by implementing local law 42. By doing so, it will save so many lives, so many souls. I want you to understand that I was acquitted of all charges and I am free, but I still suffer from mental illnesses and still want to commit suicide to this day. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stay alive. I'm sorry. That's just the truth. I still have nightmares. So am I really free? Thank you.
Antoinette Anderson will be the last in-person public speaking, then we'll go to virtual.
Good afternoon. My name is Antoinette Anderson, and I'm the Correspondent Secretary of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association. I do have a speech prepared. I am bothered by some things that was testified today, but I am also a victim of certain things as well, of some of these advocates that have spoken earlier. As a correction officer for the last 18 years, going on 19, DOC has a lot of issues. We can't fix them overnight. One of the issues that we have is we have a lot of assaults. A lot of assaults. Whether we're talking about staff or we're talking about PRC on PRC. From December to May, we have 45 stabbings. PRC on PRC, we had 149 serious injuries to PRCs caused by other PRCs. 74 slashings. Once again, we're talking about PRCs. We're not talking about anything of staff right now. My objective is always going to be the staff because I'm a correction officer. But once again, there was a lot of things that were said at this podium today that does bother me. And we do have some issues as well as other parts of the justice system. Yes, Department of Corrections is a revolving door. Programming is very serious. We need programming. Yes, we do. As a correction officer, working in admin, working in AMKC before it closed, working with the mentally ill, we have a lot of issues. We need everybody's help, not just the BOC. We need every advocacy group as well. But one problem I'm going to discuss right today, yes, I understand everybody's issue with restrictive housing. But as a correction officer, I'm going to advocate for restrictive housing because we need it. We do. Whether people agree or not, we need it. We have a lot of mentally ill that we cannot control, and they are very assaultive. So whether they assault staff or assault other PRCs, what are we supposed to do with them? How are we supposed to handle them? Somebody please tell me. Because I don't have the answer for you when I'm wrestling with a 6'5" man that has not been on his meds for days and we're getting hurt. How are we supposed to address this issue? Security or other PRCs, when they come out of their cells and they attack other PRCs, and it takes 5 or 10 of us to restrain them, what are we to do then with that same individual? Let them out and let them attack other PRCs? Please, somebody tell me what we're supposed to do. Everything is not the answer of separating everything. Yes, we can separate. Now, when we remove that individual out of the housing area and put them into another housing area and they do the same exact thing, then we're at blame, right? Please help me. Help me do our job. Help us do our job because everything can't be our fault. But we can't go to work and come home with broken bones, with broken eye sockets, and go home to our loved ones the same way we did not come in. We need everybody's help. Everybody. Yes, programming is very important. We let them out, and guess what? They come right back in. I've been in the foster care system. I am blessed, very blessed, that I did not end up in the jail system as a PRC. But many people didn't have that. They did not. And they don't know how to control themselves when they're outside in the public. Mental illness is real. I deal with it at work. I deal with it in a personal aspect. I'm not the average correction officer. Let me let y'all know I'm not. I've been through some things in life. But we need your help as well. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Board Member Franco. There's one question, Officer.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for disclosing your life story and impact. From your perspective, and particularly knowing that up to 60% of people who are incarcerated have been through the child welfare system, what can we do different?
How about open them to mental illnesses hospitals? How about put them where they belong, where they're supposed to get treatment? We're a jail system. It's only but so much treatment we can give them. Let's be honest. Where do they belong? They do not belong. This has been my testimony since I've been coming down to BOC. They don't belong on Rikers Island. Open up the mental illness hospitals where they can get the treatment that they need, because jail is not the answer. We can only give them but so much. We can't make them take their medication. We cannot. So please, what are we supposed to do? Our job is watch them to try to make sure that they're safe as possible. That's our job. I'm there to watch you. I'm not there to make sure that you take your meds. That's not my job. We don't even give out medication. We have nothing to do with that. If a PRC needs their meds and they have mental illnesses, please make sure it's a way that they ensure they take their medication. Because once they get on their meds, it's not assured that they're taking their medication. We can't guarantee you they're taking their medication. We can't force them to take their medication. But if they're in a hospital setting, they have the powers to do that. We do not.
Thank you. Any other questions? We'll go right now to the WebEx list for public comment. And we'll begin with New York City Council member Sandy Nurse.
yourself and raise your hand through the app.
Okay, we will come back to Councilmember Nurse. We'll start with Jay Edidin.
Jay, you can unmute yourself. Jay, please unmute yourself before you start your testimony.
I'm sorry, we need to go to a next one, and if Jay joins in, we'll come back to her. We're gonna go to Barrett Elman.
Please raise your hand.
Okay, are we gonna keep moving, or are we having difficulties with the online? Okay, so we'll go to Alice Sutter. Okay, Alice Sutter is here.
Alice, you can unmute yourself and start your testimony.
I think I did it. Jay, unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, got lucky. Yeah, so thank you for being so attentive to all the testimony. I just had surgery, sorry. So I wasn't able to come in today, but thank you for being so attentive to the previous speakers and for having this hearing. So I'm Alice Sturm Sutter, and I'm calling on the Board of Corrections to adopt the proposed rules with slight modifications that were suggested by the Halt Solitary Coalition and the Jails Action Coalition. And the rules are urgently needed to comply, as you know, with the local law 42, which the City Council stood up for and which you stood up for. I'm a retired family nurse practitioner and worked 40 years as an RN and nurse practitioner in New York City in public health, mental health care, HIV care, and with the underserved populations in Uptown Manhattan and the Bronx. And so many people showed trauma from years in incarceration, and especially from being in solitary confinement. It's awful. And all of what the previous testimony said, I know to be true. So when I retired, I started to work with the Halt Solitary Coalition. I heard and learned so much from people who'd been through the prison system, and it really perpetuates violence and needs to be turned around. On Halt Solitary, this didn't just come up, these rules. I mean, Halt Solitary has been working on this for years and years and really has a good program that would protect people and would protect people like the previous speaker from the corrections officers. Nobody wants to see corrections officers hurt or beaten up by huge prisoners. It's terrible. I worked in a psychiatric facility for many years, and we were able to medicate, and we were able to have people be in confinement for a certain period of time, but then we would let them out and we would talk to them and we would work with them. So there certainly needs to be some change to protect the people who are the correction officers, and I know they need more staff, but that doesn't mean that we can't implement something more humane, and it really needs to be done. It's way, way overdue. And I don't think I need to talk anymore because other people who've had experience with this directly have expressed themselves so powerfully. So I'm just adding my voice with the Halt Solitary and the Jail Action Coalition and saying, please do implement local law 42 and end, this barbaric practice and protect everyone. Everyone needs to be protected in that prison system. And I totally agree with the correction officer. A lot of people do not belong in the prisons, and there are mentally ill who really do need help. So it's got to be turned around a lot. They have a big job. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Terry Copers, MD, MSP.
Hi, Terry. Can you please unmute yourself? I'm going to make you a panelist. Thank you. Terry, you're good to go.
Oh, there we go. Hi, I'm Terry Coopers. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm professor at the Wright Institute. I have been testifying as an expert witness in class action litigation about solitary confinement, including in New York. And I've written a book on solitary called Solitary, The Inside Story of Supermax Isolation by the University of California Press. I applaud the city council enacting local law 42. I understand the Board of Corrections has the job of making rules for how that law is to be enacted. I think it's an extremely important task. I've met with the board in previous times, and I'm very impressed with the seriousness with which you take your work. The laws have to be very specific. Otherwise, what we get, in spite of the voters' desire, is solitary by another name. So I've been in many cities and county jails and many states where a law is passed limiting solitary confinement, and then individuals in the administration of corrections get around the laws by things like designing out-of-cell time that really doesn't involve meaningful activity nor meaningful social interactions. So things like the Section 6 to 19 requirement that there be 7 hours of programming required, and that it involve group activities that are facilitated by staff or peers or outside groups. That's a very important provision, because often what happens is that the people who want to undermine the law regulating solitary confinement will place a prisoner in a room and give them crayons to draw on paper and call that art therapy. It has to be spelled out exactly what's to happen in detail. I am very encouraged by the board being in charge of writing the rules. I think they need to be very specific. I congratulate you on your work and look forward to seeing the result in New York. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Hi, Morgan. I'm going to make you a panelist, okay? You can unmute yourself. Okay. The chair will announce you shortly. Thank you. The next speaker.
Hi there. My name is Morgan Brandewy. I am an NYU law student working with the Urban Justice Center. My partner, Marie Portes, is here with me on the webinar as well. And if possible, we would like to speak back to back to utilize our combined time to share a testimony, if that's acceptable. So I will now start proceeding in reading a testimony that we've collected from someone who has experienced solitary confinement. I'm in my 20s and being held at Rikers Island after being arrested in the summer of 2021. I've been housed in almost every facility at Rikers, but I'm currently at GRVC. I've been incarcerated at other jails, and I've never experienced anything similar to Rikers. I tell people you can't know what it's like until you see for yourself. At Rikers, officers are violating people's human rights left and right. They'll pepper spray you freely, even if you're just asking an innocent question. Officers get caught up in inmate culture sometimes. They try to push you to say or do something wrong so that they can pepper spray you and claim a reason why. I've been put in the Enhanced Special Housing Area, ESH, Rikers Solitary Confinement, a handful of times since I was arrested. The longest period was several months, and the shortest was several days. The last time I was in ESH, I had to wait 6 days to get a hearing, even though the policy is to have a hearing within 3 days of receiving your disciplinary ticket. On the third day, they wrote an amended disciplinary ticket to justify pushing the hearing for another 3 days. This happens to others and is done arbitrarily. That stay in ESH was related to an assault I was not involved in, and the person who was assaulted told the officers I wasn't involved, yet I was put in ESH regardless. ESH is horrible. I spend a minimum of 18 to 19 hours a day inside my cell. It is loud and impossible to sleep. I have ADHD and PTSD, which make ESH even worse for me personally. I would have flashbacks at night. I started to talk to myself and developed mental health issues. I was put on medication as a result. People often start taking medication they never took before during ESH, sleeping pills and depression pills. It is the only way to cope. You're supposed to be taken out of your cell for 1 hour of rec and a few hours in the day room every day. However, we only receive it when the officers are in the mood. Even when we are allowed to go outside is another cage only slightly larger than our cells. You can barely move around to get any form of exercise. Officers only give us showers when they feel like it, which ends up being about 3 times a week. The showers have mold. The prison blames some of these issues on being understaffed, but that's a cover-up. When you are moved outside of your cell, you are cuffed to go everywhere, and when you sit down in the day room, your legs are cuffed to the chair. Sometimes they come and get you for the day room at 6 a.m., and if you don't agree to go out right then, you can't come out for the rest of the day. You always seem to spend more time in ESH than you were originally told you would. There is no safety in ESH. You have to constantly watch your back. The only way to get an officer's attention is to be dying inside your cell. I've been placed in ESH with fresh bandages and wounds that need to heal. This is dangerous because if I had problems with anyone, I would have been vulnerable and unable to defend myself. There is supposed to be an officer outside 24/7, but most of the time it's impossible to get their attention. Officers don't want to deal with individuals who are being a problem, so we are incentivized to act a fool, so they want to move you out. This makes you even more paranoid about someone hurting you because they will do it in order to get out of ESH. This has exacerbated my PTSD. One time when I was in ESH, I left to go to court, and if possible, can I pass it on to Marie Portes so she can finish the testimony?
Yes, you have a few moments to.
Marie, please unmute yourself. You're good to go. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Marie Portes. I'm an NYU law student, also working with the Urban Justice Institute, trying to get this testimony out. Thank you for letting us go back to back. I'll pick back up where Morgan left off. One time when I was in ESH, I left to go to court, and when I came back, my cell was flooded from a malfunctioning toilet. There was over a foot of water in my cell. I told the officer and asked him to clean out my cell. The officer ignored me. The next day, I slipped and fell, hitting my head on the floor. I lost consciousness. The only reason the officer came to check on me was because my neighbor was yelling for help. The officer eventually came. I don't know how much time went by, but I did not receive the proper medical treatment even then. I was sent to the clinic to get my vitals checked, and afterwards they just sent me back to my cell, still filled with water. No one checked my head, which had been injured. I asked for it to be checked, and so did my lawyer. After my lawyer got involved, they finally called me back down to the clinic, but I never got an x-ray or anything like that. Recently, my hand was badly injured, and I had to get stitches. When I returned to ESH, I asked the officers to conduct my body search with a body scanner due to my injuries, but they insisted on doing a strip search. They beat me up in my cell. One officer held me down, one stomped on my injured hand, the third pepper sprayed me. My stitches got scratched out. I did get to go to the clinic, but they didn't do anything to help. I was supposed to get x-rays to ensure my hand was still healing properly, but that never happened. I ended up needing surgery again. I recently had that surgery. After the surgery, I was brought immediately back to ESH and it was terrible. A guy charged at me and punched me, hurting my hand further. An officer was standing right there when it happened, but they did not want to have to take me back to the hospital. I did not get the medication I needed. I was living in dirty conditions, threatening to infect my hand, and I received no documentation on how to clean or care for my hand post-surgery. My hand has been in pain for weeks. My pinky is numb and stiff, and I cannot make a fist. I have received no follow-up appointments or information from doctors, and the officers don't care to help me. In fact, the officers have made my recovery worse. I'm worried I will need another surgery on my hand if it doesn't heal properly. ESH should not exist, especially how it's being used currently. Officers use it for the wrong reasons and reward people acting up by releasing them from ESH. I understand why restrictive housing may be needed, but my experience inside ESH is crazy, and we need to replace it with something else. Change is much needed. Thank you so much for the board for giving us the opportunity to read this testimony.
Oops, no? Okay, Rebecca Phipps.
Hi, Rebecca. You're good to go. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Rebecca Phipps, and I'm the Special Litigation Attorney at New York County Defender Services. And we're very grateful to have the opportunity to give our input in this rulemaking process, in particular as it relates to strengthening the due process protections and the right to representation afforded before any restrictive setting can be imposed. We've provided to you several documents along with our written testimony that we've submitted to you today. We've included a set of proposed draft rules for Local Law 42 hearings drafted by NYCDS and the other defender offices, as well as an in-depth explainer of our proposed rules. In our written testimony and here today, I'd like to highlight a few important themes from our proposed rules and urge you to adopt them. The first theme that I want to talk about is clear communication, because clear communication is key to making any process run smoothly. I think we can all attest to that. And here, with these due process hearings, the successful implementation of Local Law 42 is going to require communication between multiple parties, DOC, the people charged, and their legal advocates. So we urge you to take this opportunity in the rulemaking process to preempt the inevitable pitfalls that will occur because of unclear communication. So to that end, our proposal expands on the notice requirements as required under Local Law 42 by adding explicit rules that require notice to be given to each person about their specific right to appear at their hearing and their right to legal representation at their hearing. Additionally, we propose laying out actual guidance in the rules about the way in which legal representatives must be notified of their client's alleged infraction and receive the evidence in support of it. Being clearly informed of one's rights is a precondition to actually exercising those rights. So that brings me to the next major theme I want to talk about, and that is that history tells us that where there are new rights, there are new opportunities for false refusals. We have all seen in many other contexts, counsel visits, court dates, video conferences, medical appointments, that people in custody are often reported to have refused some particular right or privilege when in reality they have done no such thing. So we strongly urge the board to address this directly in the rules by explicitly requiring that any refusal, not just a refusal to attend a hearing, but any refusal of legal representation as well, be recorded with video and audio. And that brings me to the final theme that I want to discuss today, which is To make these rules meaningful, they must include enforcement mechanisms in the form of sanctions and remedies for violations of these rules. Now, a large part of such sanctions, which we go into in our draft proposal, should focus on the evidence sharing that's required by Local Law 42. But one specific violation that I'll raise right now that we believe should result in a strict sanction is when the department fails to provide refusal on video. This should be strictly result in a dismissal because we know that this tactic is used. So we're asking that this be an explicit sanction that is written into the rules to hold DOC to account for these particular requirements. I know I'm over time. So we thank you for your time and your attention. We invite you to reach out to us to discuss any of the details in our draft that we've shared with you further. Thank you so much.
Hi, Kelly. You will be our next speaker. Please unmute yourself,
Kelly
please.
Grace Price.
Hi, I'll be submitting written testimony. I'm sorry I'm not in a place to testify right now.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Price. I apologize that we're trying to get organized with those online testimonies, but we'll be right with them. And it looks like maybe 3 or 4 more if all on.
Danielle Gerard, you're our next presenter, please. Thank you.
Danielle Gerard.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Board Committee members. My name is Danielle Gerard, and I'm a Senior Staff Attorney at Children's Rights. We're a national organization that advocates on behalf of youth in state systems here in the city on behalf of young adults on Rikers as a member of the Jails Action Coalition. Thank you for all the work you've done on drafting rules to implement Local Law 42 banning solitary confinement. We submitted our position paper on youth in isolation last week and hope you will take its recommendations into account as you move forward. I testified about our paper's main points at the last BOC meeting and won't go through them again now, but given the mayor's stated objective to prevent Local Law 42 from going into effect, we would like to mention a few things first. As the Board of Correction implements Local Law 42, we urge you to eliminate all euphemistically named forms of solitary confinement, ESH, secure, and RMAS, even though it's currently suspended, and to bring any form of restrictive housing into strict compliance with Local Law 42's provision concerning out of cell time, congregate activities, de-escalation, length of stay, and more. Any method of isolation not in compliance with Local Law 42 would be punitive segregation and tantamount to torture for all incarcerated persons, especially for youth up to age 25. Second, we would like the category of incarcerated young adults to comprise people up to age 25, not just 21, as decades of research show that the brain's frontal lobe, which regulates judgment, reasoning, decision-making, impulsivity, and emotions, is not fully mature until the early to mid-20s. Young people ages 18 to 25 have unique needs and face a serious risk of harm if subjected to chronic adverse experiences. This includes excessive isolation while in custody. Third, Children's Rights urges the Board of Correction to adopt its proposed rules with a few slight modifications. 3 in particular must be made 100% clear. First, all people in the jails other than while they're in detention, confinement, or emergency lock-ins must have access to at least 14 hours of daily out of cell time. 2, for the 7-hour programming requirement, everyone is entitled to such programming outside of a cell in a group setting, and all programming time shall be led by qualified staff outside community groups or peers. And third, add specific requirements for how the department must implement the legal representation requirement as detailed by the public defender organizations. Again, thank you for your work to date on the rules. Implementing local law 42 will be critical both on Rikers and in the borough-based jails after Rikers closes.
Our next. Hi, Tamara. You're our next speaker. Please unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
The next speaker.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello. My name is Tamara Carter. I'm a Freedom Agenda member. But most importantly, I am the mother of Brandon Rodriguez, who was put in solitary confinement in a shower cage August 10th, 2021. I thought so much about what I was going to say today. So many deaths are on your hands. Khalif Browder, Layleen Polanco, everyone was shocked and appalled by their deaths, but yet has done nothing. Candy, solitary survivor, who has testified on record countless times of the horror she has went through, and yet you have all done nothing. All these years you have had time to stop all these deaths, and you have done nothing. Brandon was on Torture Island for just 6 days and put in solitary confinement to suffer until his death. My son was murdered by the system. By the way, he died an innocent boy/man, or boy to me, a man to you. Brandon had multiple sclerosis, bipolar, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder from being stabbed over 18 times from when he was on Rikers a few years prior. Even with all those problems he had, he was a great singer. He was an awesome dancer, and I will always be his biggest fan. He needed treatment, not jail, not solitary confinement. I'm angry that I felt compelled to testify here today, but what else can I do? I'm begging you, please make sure that the local law 42 is applied. I know you didn't ask my opinion for accountability, but there were 8 to 9 officers that Brandon told that he felt like he was going to do suicide or hurt himself, and they did nothing. I work in the healthcare field, and if it was up to me or my supervisors, I would have been fired. So those 8 to 9 officers should have been fired. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That completes the list of people who have signed up to speak, so I'm going to bring this hearing to a close. On behalf of all my board colleagues, thank you to those who have testified today and those who have submitted comments. Again, you may submit comments until close of business today. The board will review all public comments submitted, amend the proposed rules if necessary, and vote on final rules at the next board meeting on June 25th, 2024 at 1 p.m. This hearing is adjourned.